Millionaire agreed to attend alumni party with the ugliest girl in his class, but now she's... The upscale cafe in the heart of New York City buzzed with the lively chatter of old friends reuniting. The warm lighting, the scent of freshly brewed espresso, and the clinking of fine china created an atmosphere of nostalgia mixed with success. Sitting in the corner of the cafe, Evan Carter leaned back in his chair, nursing his black coffee with a casual confidence that came naturally to him. He was surrounded by familiar faces, his former classmates from college, most of whom had found modest success in their respective fields. But none had soared quite as high as Evan. Now a self-made millionaire, Evan had built a thriving tech empire, earning him both admiration and envy. "So, Evan," said Mark, one of his old friends, swirling the whiskey in his glass, "are you planning to make an entrance at the reunion next weekend?" Evan smirked. "Hadn't really thought about it." "Come on, man." Jake, another friend, chimed in, grinning mischievously. "You were the king of our class. Everyone's expecting you to show up with some supermodel on your arm." Laughter erupted around the table, and Evan shook his head. "That was college, guys. I'm not that guy anymore." Yeah, Lisa, an old classmate, teased. Still, it would be fun to see how everyone's turned out. The conversation soon shifted, and as they continued reminiscing, the topic took an unexpected turn. "Hey, remember Julia Thompson?" Mark snorted, nudging Jake. Jake burst out laughing. "Oh man, how could I forget? Julia, the ugliest girl in our class. She was so awkward, always hiding behind those huge glasses and baggy clothes." Evan frowned slightly, stirring his coffee. He hadn't thought about Julia in years. She had been quiet, shy, and always sitting alone in the corner of the library. While he had never been cruel to her, he hadn't exactly been friendly either. Lisa rolled her eyes. "You guys are terrible. She was sweet, just different." Mark smirked. "Well, guess what? I heard she's coming to the reunion." Jake nearly choked on his drink. "No way. What's the bet?" "She probably hasn't changed a bit. I can already picture it, same frizzy hair, same old-fashioned clothes." A wicked grin crossed his face as he turned to Evan. "Hey, Evan, why don't you take Julia as your date to the reunion?" Evan looked up, his brows furrowing. "What?" "You heard me," Jake said, leaning in with a smirk. "Imagine it, big shot Evan Carter showing up with Julia Thompson. It'll be hilarious. We can see if she's still the same awkward mess or if she's finally grown up." Mark laughed. "Come on, Evan, you're always up for a challenge." Evan let out a slow breath, his ego pricked by the taunt. "And what do I get out of this?" Jake grinned. "Bragging rights, of course. And hey, maybe you'll be doing her a favor." Lisa shook her head in disapproval. "You guys are unbelievable." Evan glanced around the table, feeling the weight of their expectant gazes. Deep down, a part of him was genuinely curious. He hadn't seen Julia since graduation, and something about the way they were all so sure she'd stayed the same gnawed at him. Finally, he shrugged and smirked. "All right, fine. I'll ask her." Jake clapped his hands together. "This is going to be good." Lisa sighed. "Evan, just be nice to her, okay?" Evan nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was getting himself into. Later that evening, Evan sat in his sleek penthouse apartment, staring at his phone. He found Julia's number through their alumni group, and after a moment of hesitation, sent her a message. "Hey Julia, it's Evan Carter. Long time no see. I was wondering if you'd be interested in going to the reunion with me?" He half expected her to ignore him or respond with sarcasm, but to his surprise, his phone buzzed almost immediately. "Hi Evan. Wow, I didn't expect to hear from you. Sure, I'd love to go with you." Evan raised an eyebrow, staring at the screen. Her quick response and enthusiastic tone caught him off guard. He had braced himself for reluctance, maybe even an awkward excuse to avoid him. "Great," he typed back. "Let's meet up this week and catch up." Julia's reply came swiftly. "Sounds good. Looking forward to it." Evan set his phone down, leaning back in his chair, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Well," he murmured to himself, "this might be more interesting than I thought." For the first time in a long while, he found himself genuinely intrigued. Something told him Julia Thompson wasn't the same girl they all remembered from college. Evan arrived early at the Velvet Lounge, a sophisticated and dimly lit bar nestled in the heart of Manhattan. The atmosphere buzzed with quiet conversations, the soft clink of glasses, and the mellow hum of a jazz band playing in the background. He settled into a plush leather booth near the window, swirling the whiskey in his glass as he stared out at the city lights. His mind drifted back to college days, and he couldn't help but picture Julia Thompson, the way he remembered her, thick glasses that constantly slipped down her nose, unruly hair always tied back in a frizzy ponytail, and oversized sweaters that swallowed her petite frame. She had been the quiet one, always sitting alone with a book in hand, and often the target of cruel jokes from their classmates. Evan took another sip of his drink, smirking to himself. What am I even doing here? He thought. This was supposed to be a harmless little bet, a laugh among old friends. But something about Julia's quick and confident acceptance of his invitation made him uneasy. Just as he was about to check his watch, the door to the bar opened, and Julia walked in. Evan froze mid-sip, his eyes widening in shock. The woman who stepped inside was nothing like the girl he remembered. Julia's long, chestnut brown hair cascaded in soft waves down her shoulders, framing a face that was striking yet elegant. Gone were the thick glasses, replaced with a confident gaze that scanned the room effortlessly. She wore a sleek, form-fitting pink dress that accentuated her curves, paired with heels that gave her an air of effortless sophistication. She moved with poise, her chin lifted, exuding an aura of self-assurance that Evan found both stunning and unsettling. Damn, Evan thought, momentarily at a loss for words. He wasn't prepared for this. Julia's eyes met his across the room, and a slow smile spread across her lips. Without hesitation, she walked toward him, each step measured and graceful. "Hi, Evan," she said smoothly, sliding into the seat across from him. Evan blinked, quickly regaining his composure. "Julia, wow, you look..." He fumbled for words, but Julia simply tilted her head, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Different," she offered playfully. "Yeah," he admitted, unable to hide his surprise. "Very different." Julia smirked and waved to the bartender, ordering a glass of red wine. "Well, it's been 10 years. People change." She leaned back in her seat, observing him with a calmness that put him on edge. "Though you look pretty much the same. Still charming, still wearing those tailored suits." Evan chuckled, though he felt slightly off balance. "I guess some things never change." Julia sipped her wine thoughtfully. "So what's this all about, Evan? The reunion? The sudden invitation?" Evan hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just thought it would be fun to catch up. You know, see how everyone's doing these days." Julia raised an eyebrow. "Really? And here I thought it was just another dare from your friends. You always did enjoy a good bet." Evan stiffened slightly. "What makes you think that?" Julia tapped her manicured nails against the glass. "Oh, come on. I wasn't exactly invisible back in college, despite what people thought. I know how the old crowd used to treat me. Let me guess, they dared you to bring the ugliest girl in class to the reunion, didn't they?" Evan opened his mouth to protest, but Julia held up a hand, a small smile playing on her lips. "Relax, Evan. I'm not upset. In fact, I find it kind of amusing." Evan leaned forward, curiosity getting the better of him. "You do?" Julia nodded, swirling her wine. "Because they still think I'm the same girl. And because you were actually brave enough to ask me." Evan studied her, feeling an unfamiliar sense of admiration creeping in. "So why did you say yes?" Julia set down her glass and looked him straight in the eye. "Because I wanted to see if you'd treat me like a friend, or like a joke." Evan swallowed, suddenly feeling like the stakes were higher than he'd anticipated. Julia leaned in slightly, her voice soft but firm. "I'll go with you, Evan. But on one condition, treat me as an equal. Not as some charity case or a punchline." Evan held her gaze, realizing for the first time how much he might have underestimated her. Slowly, he nodded. "Deal." Julia smiled, satisfied. "Good. Now tell me, what exactly should I expect at this reunion? More of the same people with the same tired gossip?" Evan laughed, relaxing for the first time that night. "Pretty much. But hey, at least you'll have me to make it bearable." Julia smirked. "We'll see about that." As they continued their conversation, Evan found himself intrigued in a way he hadn't expected. Julia was sharp, confident, and refreshingly honest, qualities he found himself drawn to despite himself. And as he walked her to the door later that evening, watching her disappear into the night, one thought lingered in his mind. Maybe this reunion is going to be a lot more interesting than I thought. A few days before the reunion, Evan and Julia found themselves spending more time together, preparing for the big event. Evan had initially approached the whole situation with his usual casual attitude, expecting it to be nothing more than an amusing experience to share with his friends later. But the more time he spent with Julia, the more he realized she was nothing like the girl he remembered from college. Sitting across from her at a boutique cafe, Evan watched as Julia effortlessly discussed everything from business trends to art exhibits, her words filled with passion and intelligence. There was a quiet confidence in the way she carried herself now, a far cry from the timid girl who used to avoid eye contact. "So," Evan said, sipping his espresso, "you never really told me. How did you end up in the fashion world?" Julia leaned back in her chair, a small smile forming on her lips. "You mean how did the ugliest girl in class end up designing clothes?" Evan winced at her words, feeling a twinge of guilt. "I didn't mean it like that." She chuckled softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Relax, Evan. I know that's how people saw me back then. And to be honest, it used to bother me a lot." She paused, her gaze drifting out the window. "But after college, I realized that I didn't have to stay trapped in that version of myself. I worked hard, physically, emotionally, and professionally. I learned how to take care of myself, built confidence, and chased after what I loved." Evan listened intently, impressed by her resilience. That couldn't have been easy. Julia shrugged. "It wasn't. There were nights I wanted to give up, but I told myself that if I wanted the world to see me differently, I had to start by seeing myself differently first." Evan nodded, feeling an unexpected admiration growing inside him. Julia wasn't just different on the outside, she was strong, driven, and inspiring in a way he never anticipated. "Well," Evan said, offering a genuine smile, "I think you've done an amazing job." Julia tilted her head playfully. "Is that your way of saying you're impressed?" Evan smirked. "Let's just say I didn't see this coming." A few days later, Evan accompanied Julia to an exclusive designer boutique to pick out an outfit for the reunion. Evan leaned against the plush leather couch inside the luxurious fitting room area, watching as Julia emerged from behind the curtain in yet another stunning dress. This time she wore a sleek red gown that hugged her curves perfectly, the confidence in her posture making her even more captivating. Evan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Wow." Julia twirled slightly, examining herself in the mirror. "Too much?" she asked with a playful glint in her eye. "Not at all," Evan said, standing up and walking over to her. "You look incredible." She laughed lightly. "Careful, Evan. You almost sound sincere." He grinned. "I mean it. You look amazing, Julia." As their eyes met in the reflection of the mirror, Evan felt a strange sensation, one he couldn't quite place. There was something about her presence that was both grounding and exciting at the same time. "You know," he said slowly, "I always thought I had a type. But I think I might have been looking in the wrong places." Julia turned to face him, raising an eyebrow. "Are you saying I don't fit your usual criteria?" Evan chuckled, stepping closer. "I'm saying you're making me rethink a lot of things." Julia studied him for a moment before giving him a small, knowing smile. "Good. It's about time." Later that evening, as they walked out of the boutique, Evan found himself more drawn to Julia than he cared to admit. He glanced at her as they strolled down the busy New York street, the cool breeze carrying the scent of her subtle perfume. He admired the way she carried herself, the way she spoke with purpose, and the way she didn't need anyone's validation anymore. "You know," Evan said, breaking the silence, "I'm really glad you agreed to come with me to the reunion." Julia smirked. "Is that because you're enjoying my company or because you're hoping to shock everyone?" Evan laughed, shoving his hands in his pockets. "A little bit of both, maybe." Julia rolled her eyes but smiled. "Well, let's just say I'm looking forward to it. Seeing everyone again, it should be interesting." Evan looked at her thoughtfully. "Yeah, interesting is definitely the word I'd use." As they walked side by side, Evan couldn't shake the feeling that this reunion might not just be about showing up with Julia anymore. Maybe it was about realizing that the person he thought he was, and the person he wanted to be, weren't quite the same. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over Central Park, Evan and Julia walked side by side along the winding paths, their steps unhurried. The park was alive with the sounds of children laughing, joggers passing by, and the occasional musician strumming a gentle tune. Despite the lively atmosphere, an intimate sense of calm surrounded them. Julia carried a small shopping bag with the dress she had chosen earlier, her fingers gently brushing against the fabric inside. She glanced at Evan, who walked with his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "You're quieter than usual," she said softly. Evan smiled faintly. "Just thinking. About." "Hi." He sighed, stopping for a moment to watch a group of kids feeding ducks near the lake. "You know, when I was younger, I thought making money would solve everything. That, if I worked hard enough and built something big, I'd finally be satisfied. Julia tilted her head, sensing the vulnerability in his voice. And now? Evan let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Now I realize that success just brings a different set of problems. The pressure, the expectations. Everyone assumes I have it all together, but half the time I feel like I'm just barely keeping up. Julia listened intently, her expression thoughtful. Sounds exhausting. It is. Evan exhaled. I don't even know if I'm doing it for myself anymore, or if I'm just trying to prove something to the world. Julia nodded slowly. I know what that's like. Evan glanced at her, surprised. You do? Julia gave him a small smile. Of course. Back in college, I used to think if I could change the way I looked, the way I dressed, people would finally accept me. I thought maybe I'd feel like I belonged. But you know what I realized? Evan shook his head. What? She looked out at the shimmering lake in front of them. That I was trying to prove something to people who never really mattered. The moment I stopped caring about their opinions, I started living for myself. And honestly, it's the happiest I've ever been. Evan watched her, admiration flickering in his eyes. That's impressive. I wish I had that kind of clarity. Julia laughed lightly. It takes time, and a lot of self-doubt along the way. He smiled, his gaze softening. I guess we're both still figuring things out. Julia turned to him, her eyes meeting as in the fading light. We are, and that's okay. For a moment, there was a comfortable silence between them. As they reached the edge of the lake, the water reflecting the soft glow of the city skyline in the distance, Evan hesitated before speaking. You know, he said quietly, I never really thought much about what happened back in college. I was too caught up in my own world to see what others were going through. Julia shrugged. We were kids, Evan. We didn't know any better. He looked at her earnestly. But you did. And you handled it a hell of a lot better than most people would have. Julia smiled, her expression warm. I had to. Dwelling on the past wouldn't have changed anything. Evan nodded slowly, feeling a newfound respect for her resilience. He reached out instinctively, taking her hand in his. Julia glanced down at their intertwined fingers, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed his hand gently, offering a silent reassurance that she was okay with it. Evan swallowed, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over him. I'm glad we reconnected, Julia, he said softly. Julia looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the shimmering water. Me too. They stood there in the stillness of the evening, hand in hand, both realizing that something had shifted between them, something deeper than just a shared past. For the first time in a long time, Evan felt like he was finally where he was supposed to be. And for Julia, she realized that maybe, just maybe, Evan Carter wasn't the same person she once knew. The reunion was just a day away, and Evan and Julia had decided to meet at a rooftop bar to unwind before the big event. The evening air was crisp, filled with the hum of city traffic below and the soft clinking of glasses around them. Julia looked radiant under the fairy lights, her laughter effortless as she sipped her wine. Evan, sitting across from her, felt something he hadn't in a long time, contentment. But just as he was about to suggest they leave, familiar voices drifted in from a table nearby. Can you believe Evan is actually taking Julia to the reunion? Evan's heart dropped. He recognized the voice instantly, Jake, the same friend who had dared him to ask Julia out in the first place. I know, another voice, Mark, chimed in, laughing. It was supposed to be a joke, right? I mean, when we said he should bring her, we never thought he'd actually follow through. Julia stiffened beside him, her fingers tightening around her glass. Evan's stomach twisted into knots as he turned toward the conversation, hoping they would stop, hoping Julia hadn't heard. But then came the worst part. Come on, man, Jake continued. We all know Evan wouldn't have asked her if it wasn't for the bet. I mean, Julia Thompson? Seriously? Silence hung heavy between Evan and Julia. Slowly, she set her drink down and stood up. Julia, Evan said urgently, reaching for her hand. But she took a step back, her face pale, her eyes shining with a mixture of disbelief and pain. So it was a bet, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. Evan's throat tightened. Julia, let me explain. But she was already shaking her head. I can't believe I actually thought, her voice cracked, and she turned, walking briskly toward the exit. Evan didn't hesitate. He followed her down the stairs, pushing past crowds of people until they reached the quiet street outside. Julia, please, he pleaded, catching up to her. Just listen to me. Julia whirled around, her eyes blazing. Listen to what, Evan? That it was all just a game to you. That I was nothing but a joke you wanted to show off. Evan ran a hand through his hair, frustration clear in his expression. Yes, okay? In the beginning, it was a stupid bet. But it's not like that anymore, Julia. I swear. Julia crossed her arms, holding herself as if trying to shield against the sting of betrayal. How am I supposed to believe that, Evan? How do I know this whole thing hasn't just been for show? Evan stepped closer, his voice softer now, desperate. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped caring about the reunion. I stopped caring about what they thought. It stopped being about a bet and started being about you. Julia looked at him, searching his face for any hint of insincerity, but doubt clouded her features. I opened up to you, Evan, she whispered. I let you in, and now I feel like a complete fool. Evan's chest ached at her words. You're not a fool, Julia. I am. I was an idiot for ever agreeing to that stupid dare, and I regret it more than you can imagine. But what I feel for you now is real. Julia turned away, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. I don't know if I can do this, Evan. I don't know if I can trust you. Evan swallowed hard. Let me prove it to you. Please, just don't shut me out. For a long moment, Julia stood there, staring at the pavement beneath her feet, torn between her feelings and the painful truth she had just learned. Finally, she whispered, I need time. Evan nodded, though it killed him inside. Take all the time you need, he said gently. But please, don't give up on us just yet. Julia didn't reply. She simply turned and walked away into the night, leaving Evan standing alone, wondering if he had just lost the one person who had ever truly mattered. The night of the reunion had arrived, and the grand ballroom of the luxurious hotel buzzed with laughter, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Former classmates mingled, sharing stories of their successes, reminiscing about the past, and of course sneaking glances at the one couple everyone had been talking about, Evan Carter and Julia Thompson. Julia stood near the entrance, her heart pounding in her chest as she gazed across the room. She looked stunning in the elegant red gown she had chosen days before, her confidence shining brighter than ever. But inside, she still felt the sting of betrayal from Evan's earlier confession. She hadn't spoken to him since that night outside the bar. She took a deep breath and stepped further into the crowd, polite smiles greeting her from people who once barely acknowledged her existence. Despite the whispers and stares, she held her head high, determined to show them that she wasn't the insecure girl they once knew. Across the room, Evan stood with a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching her. His heart ached at how effortlessly she carried herself, but he could see the guarded look in her eyes. He had to fix this tonight. The DJ announced for everyone's attention, calling for a moment of recognition for notable alumni. As the crowd hushed, Evan took a deep breath, handed his drink to a passing waiter, and stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room. Julia's eyes widened in surprise as he tapped the microphone, his deep voice filling the ballroom. Good evening, everyone, Evan began, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. I know tonight is about reconnecting, reminiscing, and celebrating how far we've all come. But before we do that, I need to say something I should have said a long time ago. The room grew quieter, all eyes on him. Julia's stomach tightened. Evan glanced around the room, his gaze finally landing on Julia. When I agreed to come to this reunion, it wasn't for the right reasons. I thought it would be fun, a chance to relive old times and maybe impress a few of you. He let out a small, self-deprecating chuckle, but somewhere along the way, something changed. He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving Julia's. I made a mistake. A big one. I asked Julia Thompson to be my date as part of a stupid dare. And at first, I thought it was harmless. But what I didn't expect, what I never saw coming, was how wrong I was about her. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Julia's eyes widened, and she felt her heart skip a beat. Evan's voice softened. Julia isn't just some girl from our past that people used to make fun of. She's smart, kind, driven, and has accomplished more than most of us could dream of. And somewhere along the way, I realized that she wasn't the one who needed to prove anything. It was me. The murmurs stopped, and a hush fell over the room. I'm sorry, Julia, Evan said, his voice thick with emotion. I hurt you, and you didn't deserve that. But I need you to know, everything that happened between us, everything I feel for you now, is real. Julia stood frozen, tears welling in her eyes as she watched him bare his soul in front of their entire class. And if it's not too late, Evan continued, stepping down from the stage and walking toward her, I'd really like the chance to prove it. The crowd parted, eyes bouncing between them, waiting for her response. Julia swallowed the lump in her throat, her fingers trembling slightly. Slowly, she took a deep breath and stepped forward, meeting Evan's gaze. "That took a lot of courage," she said softly. Evan nodded, his heart hammering in his chest. "It did. But you're worth it." Julia searched his eyes, and for the first time in days, she saw the sincerity, the vulnerability she had been hoping for. She smiled, a soft, genuine smile. "I believe you, Evan." Relief flooded through him, and before he could say another word, Julia extended her hand. "Dance with me?" Evan's smile grew as he took her hand gently, leading her to the center of the dance floor. As the music swelled, they swayed slowly under the soft glow of the chandelier, surrounded by their classmates who watched in awe. The whispers faded away, and in that moment, nothing else mattered but the two of them. Evan leaned down and whispered, "Thank you for giving me another chance." Julia rested her head against his chest, whispering back, "Don't waste it." As the night wore on, Evan and Julia walked out of the ballroom hand in hand, stepping into the cool night air. "I have to admit," Julia said, looking up at him with a teasing smile, "that was quite the grand gesture back there." Evan chuckled. "I figured you deserved nothing less." Julia squeezed his hand. "Maybe you're not the same guy I remember from college after all." He smiled, pulling her closer. "And maybe you're not the same girl I thought you were either." Together they walked down the quiet New York street, leaving behind the ghosts of the past and stepping into something new, something real. 1 year later, life had taken on a new rhythm for Evan and Julia, one that balanced ambition with love, dreams with reality. Julia's fashion brand, Thompson Atelier, had officially launched, and to no one's surprise, it was already making waves in the industry. With Evan's unwavering support and Julia's relentless drive, the business flourished, gaining recognition for its elegant yet empowering designs. Evan, despite his packed schedule running his tech empire, always made time for Julia. He loved watching her in action, whether she was sketching designs late at night or presenting her collection at exclusive fashion events. And Julia, in turn, found herself thriving in ways she never imagined, her confidence soaring with Evan by her side. One evening, in their cozy New York apartment, Julia sat at the kitchen counter, reviewing sketches while Evan cooked dinner, a skill he was slowly perfecting, much to Julia's amusement. "You know," Evan said, stirring the pasta, "I think I might quit my job and become your personal chef." Julia laughed, glancing up from her work. "As much as I appreciate the effort, I think your tech empire might miss you just a little." Evan smirked, plating the food. "Yeah, but this," he gestured between them, "this is what I actually look forward to at the end of the day." Julia smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "Me too." They sat down to eat, and Evan reached across the table to take her hand. "I'm proud of you, you know that." Julia squeezed his hand. "I couldn't have done it without you." Evan shook his head. "You could have. I just had the privilege of watching you do it." Months later, at the grand opening of her flagship boutique, Julia stood in front of a packed crowd, holding Evan's hand tightly as she addressed the audience. "Tonight is more than just the launch of my brand," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "It's proof that no matter where you come from, or what people used to think of you, you can rewrite your story." Evan watched her with pride, knowing how much this moment meant to her. When the applause filled the room, he whispered, "I told you the world would see you the way I do." Julia turned to him, eyes shining. "And I told you I didn't need saving." Evan grinned. "I think we saved each other." A few weeks later, Evan surprised Julia with an impromptu getaway. They found themselves walking hand in hand along the sun-drenched streets of Paris, a city Julia had always dreamed of visiting. As they strolled along the Seine River, Julia leaned her head against Evan's shoulder. "You know, if you had told me a year ago that I'd be here with you, I wouldn't have believed it." Evan chuckled. "And if you had told me I'd be walking around Paris holding hands with my date from Adair, I'd say you were crazy." Julia laughed, nudging him playfully. "So, was it worth it?" Evan stopped walking, turning to face her. Every second. He took both of her hands, gazing into her eyes. "I love you, Julia." Julia's heart swelled with emotion. "I love you too, Evan." They shared a gentle kiss under the Parisian sky, the Eiffel Tower twinkling in the distance. Later that evening, they sat at a small cafe, sipping wine and watching the world go by. Julia reached across the table, her fingers intertwining with Evan's. "No more bets," she said with a teasing smile. Evan laughed. "No more bets, just us." As they sat there, surrounded by the beauty of the city, they both knew that despite coming from different worlds, they had found something rare, something real. Love had found them in the most unexpected way, and neither of them would change a thing. And with that, they raised their glasses, toasting to the journey ahead, together. And so, Julia and Evan's journey shows us that love can blossom in the most unexpected ways. It teaches us that true connection goes beyond appearances, beyond the past, and beyond what others may think. When two hearts find each other, no obstacle is too great, and no difference is too vast. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where we bring you touching tales that inspire and uplift your soul. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another beautiful story about love, resilience, and the power of second chances. Thank you for watching, and remember, love has a way of finding us when we least expect it. See you in the next story.